To talk about this further is the Vice President of Policy at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, Patrick Hedger. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you for having me.
We hear of studies that raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour over time would increase pay and may reduce poverty, but these studies are not taking into account how it would affect consumers. Tell us more about the potential repercussions.
Well, yeah, the devil's in the details, really, and Democrats are even admitting that they know economic harm will be caused by raising the wage to $15 an hour because they're doing it gradually over time, or so the proposal calls for. So they acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of economic repercussions from doing something that dramatic. If there weren't, you could just raise it to $15 an hour tomorrow and there shouldn't be any harm, right? But yeah, the impact on consumers is obvious. This money just doesn't come out of thin air. Businesses aren't exactly lining their pockets these days with the COVID-19 crisis, so they're going to have to raise prices or cut costs elsewhere. They're going to have to reduce services. All of that harms consumers, and it also. We can't forget to talk about how this harms the workers that end up losing hours and maybe losing their jobs because businesses are cutting back on the number of people that they employ.
And to your point, I mean, we're even seeing in restaurants that they're adding a service charge, and that's because of state and local governments. They're raising the minimum wage there, and then, of course, rent increases and so on and so forth. What do you say to people who argue this is the longest period, nearly 12 years, that the U.S. has gone without raising the minimum wage since first being implemented in 1938, who say that the benefits of the policy far outweigh the potential costs?
Yeah, I would say look at the actual percentage of the population that is at or near minimum wage. It's a very small percentage of the working population, and those aren't the same people year after year. People enter the workforce, they gain new skills, and they're able to command higher wages, right? If businesses were only going to pay people the minimum wage, you'd see a lot larger percentage of the population making the minimum wage. So this is about making sure that the minimum wage is low enough so that folks that can't generate $15 an hour can get into the workforce and gain the skills necessary to command higher wages, because that's how markets work. We know any good economics 101 student can tell you exactly what a price floor like the minimum wage is going to do. And all it does is pull the economic ladder up a little bit higher so that the people at the lowest levels of society have a harder time getting access to the jobs and skills necessary to gain higher wages. It's hard to see how there's any benefit to that.
And in late 2019, the Congressional Budget Office released projections saying that increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it would cause increased joblessness. And then we hear Republicans saying that companies, they would just outsource their jobs to countries such as China, which we obviously don't want to happen. Moving on more towards Capitol Hill in the White House, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who is a Democrat, said he won't back a provision for a $15 minimum wage. How much could this hamper efforts regarding the Raise the Wage Act and affect President Biden's COVID relief package?
Well, with the way the Senate is structured right now, Joe Manchin might be the most powerful person in Washington. So a lot of things have to get by his desk. And he's recognizing the reality that a dollar in West Virginia is a lot different than a dollar in New York. And, you know, $15 an hour minimum wage in West Virginia is going to put a lot of businesses in West Virginia out of business, but it might not hurt places like New York, where you're already seeing very high wages for even low-skilled jobs. So I think Senator Manchin is right to raise these objections and acknowledge that this is a policy that if you're going to have a minimum wage at all, it's best to have it on a local level so that you can account for those cost of differences, or cost of living differences, excuse me.
And it's also important to note that it's unclear if Democrats will be able to include the minimum wage hike in a bill to be passed through reconciliation. To be eligible for that in the Senate, policies must be tied to the budget and impact outlays and revenue. They can't be incidental. Lastly, where can our viewers go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go to www.protectingtaxpayers.org. We work on this issue and lots of other issues related to domestic economic policy.
Patrick Hedger of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you for having me.